The fountain pen felt heavier than a weapon in her hand. Its gold nib hovered over the signature line, a single drop of black ink swelling at the tip, pregnant with the end of a world. The paper was thick, creamy, and impossibly expensive, just like everything else in his life. Everything except her. Eleanor stared at the document. Dissolution of marriage. Such a sterile term for dismantling a life, for the cold, quiet transaction her marriage had become. Across the vast mahogany desk, Marco Rossini watched her, his stillness a predatory thing. He wore a dark gray suit tailored with surgical precision, his hands resting flat on the polished wood. He had not raised his voice. He had not needed to. His words, delivered in a low, even tone minutes earlier, were more effective than any shout. "Vivian is back," he had said. "It is time." And now the pen, the paper, the choice that was not a choice at all. She had been his wife for 5 years. A quiet, comfortable arrangement. He needed a wife who would ask no questions, who would blend into the background of his opulent, violent world. An American, someone without ties, without family that could be used as leverage. He had chosen her, a quiet accountant with sensible shoes and a mind for numbers. A woman whose placid exterior promised no drama. He had bought her a life of silent luxury. However, he had never truly seen her. To him, she was a fixture, a piece of solid, reliable furniture. Unremarkable. Safe. She pressed the nib to the paper. The ink bled into the fibers, a dark stain spreading. Eleanor Catherine Rossini. She signed her name with a steady hand, the loops and lines as neat and controlled as the ledgers she kept for his legitimate businesses. She slid the document across the desk. Her part of the transaction was complete. Marco picked it up, his eyes scanning her signature before giving a curt, almost imperceptible nod. It was done. He had expected tears, perhaps a negotiation, a pathetic plea. Her silence seemed to unnerve him more than any outburst would have. He opened a drawer and produced another envelope, this one thicker. "This is generous," he stated, not as a question, but as a fact. "A clean break. You will want for nothing." Eleanor looked at the envelope but made no move to take it. "I already have everything I need, Marco." For the first time, a flicker of something, annoyance, perhaps confusion, crossed his face. He watched her rise from the leather chair. She was not the slim, fiery Italian beauty Vivian was. She was soft, curved, a woman built for comfort, not for show. He had always seen that as a feature, not a flaw. A soft woman was a manageable woman. He was beginning to question that assessment. She walked to the door of his study, her movements unhurried. She did not look back. The click of the lock disengaging was the only sound in the cavernous room. He was left alone with the signed papers and the unsettling feeling that he had just concluded a deal where he had not understood all the terms. He had dismissed her. That was his first mistake. His second was assuming she would simply disappear. He did not know that for 5 years, Eleanor had not just been living in his world. She had been studying it. And a good accountant always knows where the assets are hidden. 2 weeks later, the first tremor hit his empire. It was subtle, almost undetectable. A holding company based in the Cayman Islands, one that funneled funds for his European shipping logistics, suddenly had its assets frozen. It was not a government action. It was an internal covenant, triggered by an obscure clause tied to a change in marital status of the primary beneficiary. A clause no one had known existed. No one except the person who had drafted the trust agreement 5 years ago. Marco sat in the same study, the phone hot against his ear, his underboss, Enzo, speaking in clipped, worried tones on the other end. "The accounts are locked, Marco. The bank is citing a spousal protection clause. It requires a signature from Eleanor Rossini to release the funds." The silence that followed was heavy enough to suffocate. Marco looked at the signed divorce papers, still sitting on the corner of his desk. A trophy that had just turned into a landmine. He had given her a pen, and she had used it to write a declaration of war he had not even seen. His clean break was a tangled mess. And he, the most feared man in New York, needed his quiet, discarded wife to fix it. He had let her go. Now he had to get her back. Eleanor's new apartment was in a pre-war building in a quiet, tree-lined street in Brooklyn, the kind of place Marco's men would never think to look. It was a world away from the cold glass and steel of his penthouse. It was small, filled with books and the scent of old paper. It was hers. She was brewing tea when the knock came. Not a polite rap, but a solid, authoritative sound that vibrated through the floor. She knew who it was. She had been waiting. She opened the door to find him standing there, flanked by two of his soldiers. He was dressed in a black overcoat, the collar turned up against a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. His eyes, the color of dark roast coffee, swept over her, taking in her simple gray sweater and the comfortable way she stood in her own space. There was no fear in her posture. "Eleanor," he said. His voice was a low rumble. "Marco," she replied, her tone even. "You shouldn't be here. We need to talk. I believe we said everything that needed to be said." She made no move to let him in. His jaw tightened. He dismissed his men with a flick of his head. They retreated down the hall, their presence a lingering threat. Now it was just the two of them, the tension a physical thing in the narrow doorway. "The Caspian Holdings account," he said, getting straight to the point. "It's frozen. You know why?" "It's a standard clause," she said, her voice betraying nothing. "To protect assets in the case of a dissolution. I assume your lawyers missed it." "My lawyers did not set up the trust, Eleanor." "You did." The accusation was plain. He saw it now. The quiet competence he had mistaken for docility. For 5 years, she had managed the finances of his shipping company, the largest of his legitimate fronts. He had given her access, believing she was too timid to look beyond the surface. He saw now that she had X-rayed the entire structure. "I was always thorough," she said. "You valued that in my work. Unlock it," it was a command. She finally met his gaze, and for the first time, he saw the steel beneath her soft exterior. "The divorce is not yet finalized. The settlement you offered is generous, but it does not reflect my contribution to the growth of your legitimate enterprises. One might call this a renegotiation." He took a step closer, his height and presence meant to intimidate. It had always worked before. It did not work now. She did not flinch, did not retreat. She simply stood her ground, the scent of chamomile tea clinging to her sweater. "This is a dangerous game you are playing," he whispered, the words a silken threat. "It's your game, Marco. I just finally learned the rules." She paused, letting the silence stretch. "You need my signature. If you want it, you will come back tomorrow, alone, and we will discuss my new terms. Until then, I suggest you find a way to make your payroll without access to your offshore accounts." She closed the door in his face. Not a slam, but a quiet, firm click. Marco stood in the hallway of the unassuming building, staring at the wood grain of her door. He had married her because he thought she was simple. He had divorced her because he thought she was disposable. He had just discovered she was essential, and she knew it. The game had changed, and Eleanor, his quiet, sensible Eleanor, was making the next move. He returned the next day, as she knew he would. He was alone this time, his black town car a dark predator parked at the curb. When she opened the door, he was holding a single file. He stepped inside without being invited, his presence instantly shrinking the small apartment. He moved like the room owed him space. "Your terms," he said, dropping the file on her small dining table. It landed with a heavy thud. She did not open it. "My terms are not financial, Marco." He turned slowly, his eyes narrowed. "What, then?" "I want oversight," she said. "Full access to the legitimate holdings. Not just the shipping company. All of them. The real estate ventures, the import-export businesses, everything. I will restructure them, protect them, make them invulnerable to this kind of inconvenience." He stared at her, incredulous. "You want a job?" "I want control of the one thing I can control," she corrected him. "The numbers. Your other world, the one with guns and whispers, that is yours. But the money, the foundation it's all built on, will be mine to manage." I will be your partner, not your wife. And certainly not your victim. It was an audacious demand. Unthinkable. To give an outsider an ex-wife that kind of power was suicide. But the alternative was ruin. The Moretti family, his oldest rivals, were already circling. They would sense the financial disruption like sharks smelling blood in the water. He could not afford a single moment of weakness. Eleanor had him cornered, and they both knew it. You do this, he said, his voice dangerously low. And you are back in, all the way in. There is no leaving a second time. I'm not planning on leaving, she said. I'm planning on surviving. That was the moment everything changed. He agreed. He had no choice. And so began their new arrangement. She worked from her small apartment, a ghost in his machine, her days spent untangling the complex web of shell corporations and trusts he had built over decades. He would send a driver with encrypted hard drives, and she would send them back with instructions. They spoke only when necessary, their conversations brief and transactional. Then Vivian reappeared. She arrived at the penthouse one evening while Marco was on a call with Eleanor, going over a transfer that needed to be expedited. Vivian's voice, high and sharp, cut through the connection. Who are you talking to, Marco? Is it her? That fat cow you were married to? Eleanor heard every word. She remained silent, her fingers resting on the keyboard. She heard Marco's voice drop to a lethal murmur, the words indistinct but the tone unmistakable. A moment later, he was back on the line. Continue, he said, as if nothing had happened. The transfer is routed, Eleanor said, her voice a flat monotone. But Marco, your liability is showing. She disconnected the call before he could respond. The next day, the Morettis made their move. It was not financial. It was personal. They knew about the disruption in his accounts, and they mistook the cause. They assumed Vivian, his beautiful, flashy mistress, was the reason for his distraction. They sent a message by firebombing her car, a brand new Maserati, while it was parked outside a designer boutique. Vivian was unharmed but hysterical. Marco's world was suddenly on fire. He called Eleanor that night, not for business. He did not say anything for a long moment. She could hear the faint clink of ice in a glass. They think Vivian is my weakness, he finally said. Is she? Eleanor asked, her voice neutral. He was silent. In that silence, she heard the truth. Vivian was a distraction, a beautiful ornament, but she was not his weakness. His weakness was his past, a betrayal that had carved a deep wound in him. He had told her the story once, in the early days of their marriage, believing her to be a safe confessor. His father had been killed because his most trusted capo, a man he loved like a brother, had sold him out to the Morettis for a piece of their territory. Since then, Marco trusted no one. He had married Eleanor precisely because he believed she had no ambition, no angle, no one to betray him for. He had built a fortress around his heart, and Eleanor had been part of the wall. The Morettis are looking for a crack in the foundation, Eleanor said, her voice pulling him from the memory. They are testing your defenses. They chose the wrong target. What do you mean? They should have come for me, she said simply. A cold dread washed over Marco. She was right. Vivian was the shiny object meant to draw the eye. But Eleanor was the one who could actually bring him down. She held the keys to his kingdom. The Morettis were brutal, but they were not stupid. It would not take them long to figure out who held the real power. Stay inside. Don't open your door for anyone, he commanded. I'm not a child, Marco. I know how to be careful. But her caution was not enough. 2 days later, they came for her. Not with bombs or guns, but with quiet, professional precision. They waited until she left her apartment for her morning walk, 2 men in dark suits intercepting her on a quiet street. Before she could scream, a hand was clamped over her mouth, and she was being bundled into the back of a black sedan. Her mind worked faster than her fear. She did not struggle. She went limp, making herself dead weight. As they pushed her into the car, she deliberately kicked off one of her shoes, a sturdy brown loafer. It skittered under a parked car, a small, insignificant detail that no one would notice. But she knew Marco's head of security, a man named Leo, was watching her building. He was meticulous. He would notice a single shoe where there should be none. It was a small hope, but it was all she had. In the car, a thick burlap sack was pulled over her head. The car smelled of stale cigar smoke and cheap air freshener. She focused on the sounds, the turns, the rumble of the tires over different road surfaces. She was a forensic accountant. Her mind was trained to find patterns in chaos. She counted the seconds between turns, cataloging the data, building a map in her head. She would not be a helpless victim. When they finally pulled the sack from her head, she was in a damp, concrete basement. The air was cold and smelled of mildew. A single bare bulb hung from the ceiling. A man sat on a wooden chair opposite her. He was older, with a face like a collapsed building. She recognized him from news photos.
Alessandro Moretti.
The head of the family. Eleanor Rossini, he said, his voice a gravelly rasp. You have caused me a great deal of trouble. I'm just an accountant, she said, her voice steady despite the frantic pounding of her heart. Moretti smiled, a chilling sight.
No.
You are a queen. You hold his treasury. And you are going to give it to me. That is when she made the mistake of looking past him. In the shadows behind Moretti, another figure stood. It was Enzo, Marco's underboss, his second in command, the man he trusted with his life. And he was standing with the enemy. The betrayal was a cold, physical shock, worse than the kidnapping. It was Marco's wound, playing out all over again. Marco felt the world tilt when Leo called him. She's gone. They took her. We found a shoe. A single shoe. It was so like her. A small, intelligent breadcrumb left in the heart of the storm. He knew instantly who had her. The Morettis. But he did not know how they had found her, how they had gotten past his security. It had to be an inside job. The thought was a shard of ice in his gut. He trusted so few. Enzo was at the top of that short list. He called Enzo. The call went to voicemail. The ice in his gut spread through his veins. He knew. He looked around his penthouse, at the priceless art and the panoramic views of the city. It was all just a gilded cage, and he had let the viper in himself. He had been so focused on the enemy outside his walls, he had not seen the one standing right beside him. He did not call his soldiers. He did not prepare for war. He did something else. He went to his safe and pulled out a single, worn leather-bound ledger. It was his father's. The last thing he had written in it before he died was a name. Luca, the man who had betrayed him. Beside the name there was a string of numbers. A bank account. A dead end he had never been able to trace. He drove to Eleanor's apartment. He let himself in with the spare key he still had. Her scent, chamomile and paper, filled the space. It was the only place that had felt remotely like a home in years. He sat at her small desk and opened her laptop. He did not know her password. He typed one word, thorough. The screen unlocked. He accessed the secure portal she had built for their work. He uploaded a scan of the page from his father's ledger. And then he typed a single message. He's with them. They have you. Find the money. Burn them to the ground. He did not know if she would ever see it. But it was the only move he had left. He had tried to win with violence. Now he had to trust her to win with numbers. In the basement, Eleanor faced Alessandro Moretti. She had stalled for hours, claiming she needed access to her systems, that the codes were not things she carried in her head. Moretti was growing impatient. Enzo stood in the corner, his face a mask of stone. He had not said a word to her. Finally, Moretti had a laptop brought down. You have 1 hour, he said. Give me access to Rossini's main accounts, and you walk away. She knew it was a lie. She was a loose end. But it was the chance she needed. They logged her into a virtual machine, watching her every move. She navigated to the portal Marco had used. His message was waiting. He's with them. The confirmation was a cold wait. Find the money. Burn them to the ground. She looked at the scanned page from the ledger. Luca, the name of the first betrayer, and a string of numbers. It was an old Swiss account number, obsolete format, but the numbers themselves, they were a cipher. Her mind raced, sifting through years of financial data, looking for the pattern. It was not an account number. It was a routing key, hidden inside the source code of a defunct cryptocurrency platform Marco's organization had used for a brief time a decade ago. It was a digital ghost. She began to type. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, a blur of motion. Moretti and Enzo watched, thinking she was initiating a transfer. But she was not moving money. She was building a cage. She found the dormant account. It was a treasure chest, filled with decades of the Moretti family's untraceable wealth, laundered through the old crypto platform. The money Luca had been paid for his betrayal had been the seed capital. She did not steal it. Stealing it would be too simple, too clean. Instead, she executed a series of complex, layered transactions, linking the Moretti funds directly to known terrorist financing networks and international arms dealers on every government watchlist. She did not just drain the account. She poisoned it. She flagged it, reported it, and set off every digital tripwire from the SEC to Interpol. She attached Enzo's digital signature, captured from a dozen legitimate documents he had signed over the years, to the most damning of the transactions. She was not just burning them down. She was framing them for a fire of their own making. When she was done, she pushed the laptop back. "It's done," she said. Moretti grinned. "Good girl," he nodded to one of his men. That is when the doors to the basement exploded inwards. It was not a raid. It was just Marco. He moved through the dust and chaos not like a man, but like a force of nature. He was not there to negotiate. He was there to end things. The violence was brutal, economical, and swift. In the ensuing chaos, Eleanor did not cower. She grabbed the heaviest thing she could find, a rusted pipe fitting, and brought it down on the knee of the man reaching for her. He screamed and went down. She scrambled away, her eyes scanning for an exit. She was never rescued passively. When the dust settled, only 3 people were left standing. Eleanor, breathing heavily, the pipe still in her hand. Marco, untouched, his suit immaculate despite the carnage. And Enzo, a dark hole in his shoulder, bleeding on the floor, Alessandro Moretti dead at his feet. Marco walked over to Enzo, his face carved from ice. He did not say a word. He simply looked down at the man who had been his brother. The betrayal was absolute. He raised his weapon. "No," Eleanor said, her voice cutting through the ringing in her ears. Marco paused, his eyes finding hers. "Not like this," she said. "His way is with a bullet. Our way is better," she gestured to the laptop. "By tomorrow morning, every federal agency will be at his door. They will take everything from him. His money, his name, his freedom. They will bury him in a concrete cell for the rest of his life. Let them have him. Let him live with what he did." Marco looked from her to Enzo, then back. He saw the cold, clear logic in her eyes. It was a vengeance more complete than any bullet could offer. He lowered his gun. He walked over to her, his gaze intense. He reached out and gently took the pipe from her hand, his fingers brushing against hers. The contact was electric. "You have ice in your veins, Eleanor Rossini," he said, his voice laced with a dark, unfamiliar admiration. "I learned from the best," she replied. They left Enzo for the authorities. They walked out of the ruined building and into the pre-dawn light of the city. The world felt different, remade. They did not speak on the drive back to the penthouse. The silence between them was not empty. It was filled with everything that had just happened, and everything that was about to. Back in his study, the sun was rising, casting long shadows across the room. The signed divorce papers were still on his desk. He picked them up, walked over to a heavy crystal ashtray, and lit a corner of the document with his lighter. They both watched the paper curl and blacken, her name and his turning to ash. "The divorce was a mistake," he said. "It was the closest he would ever come to an apology." "It was a necessary transaction," she countered. "It showed us both what we truly valued." He turned to her. In his hand, he held a heavy gold signet ring, the one he always wore on his right pinky. It had been his father's. He held it out to her, not placing it on her finger, but offering it in his open palm. "The family needs a head," he said, his voice quiet but absolute. "Not just a boss. It needs a mind. A queen." Eleanor looked at the ring. It was a crown and a cage, a promise of power and a life sentence. It was heavy with the blood of the past and the uncertainty of the future. She thought of her quiet apartment, her books, the simple life she had almost regained. Then she thought of the thrill of the fight, the cold satisfaction of watching an empire crumble at her command, the look in Marco's eyes when he realized who she truly was. She had been a ghost in his world. Now he was asking her to haunt it with him. She told herself it was survival, but it was more than that. She had been dismissed and underestimated her entire life. Here, in this world of violence and shadows, she had found her power. She had been tested, and she had not been found wanting. She looked at Marco, at the man who had discarded her and then discovered he could not live without her. He was dangerous. He was lethal. He was hers to command in his own way. She reached out and took the ring from his palm. Its weight was familiar, like the fountain pen she had used to sign her name, a tool to build a new world. She closed her hand around it, the cold metal pressing into her skin. The choice was made.